Hello again, whiskey friends. Hey, thanks for joining everybody for another Tuesday discussion. So, here on Tuesdays, we do like to answer questions and comments that came either from our Patreon, YouTube, or Instagram communities. And one of the topics that came up recently was we just went on a Bourbon Trail trip, and somebody was asking me for tips and tricks for planning a Bourbon Trail trip. Now, I have gotten the lucky experience now of planning three different trips, essentially one each of the last 3 years. And I have learned a whole lot about having a successful Bourbon Trail trip. And I must say, this last one that we went on was something quite special. So I'm going to give you some tips and tricks to think about if you are planning your own Bourbon Trail trip. So thank you for joining me today, whiskey friends. Let's kick off the show. All right. So, as with these Tuesday discussions, I do like having a little pour with everybody while we chat, though typically I just talk and talk and talk and never drink it. But today I will be having the Hauling Station. This is a single barrel coming from, at least sourced by MGP, and it is 83% wheat, 12% corn, 5% malted barley. So, this is a wheat whiskey coming from Indiana. Not an Indiana brand, but sourced by Indiana. You get the point. And this particular one I am going to be sipping on because this was gifted to me by Jason, the Modern Norseman. Thank you so much, Jason. He had a blast during our trip, and I'm going to describe why that trip was so successful. If anything, I'm almost intimidated by this trip because it worked out so well that I don't know how we can repeat it. Or if we try to repeat it, is there going to be diminishing returns doing the same thing all over again? I'm sure we'll find a way to top it. But yes, this is all about planning a Bourbon Trail trip. And I do have 5 important tips for you, things to keep in mind well in advance, essentially, of planning the trip. This really isn't something that you should wait last minute to plan. You may get lucky on some things, but if you're trying to put together a whole itinerary, it can get really, really tough if you aren't planning in advance. So we'll go through 5 tips. Let's start with the first one, and that is to plan in advance at least maybe 90 days for many of the distilleries, many of the restaurants. So ultimately, some of these places don't even let you reserve until you're 90 days out. So go to each website, see what the timing is for that particular distillery, for that particular restaurant that you might have your heart set on, and see when the reservation window opens. But ultimately, on average, it is a 90-day window for most places, but that is something that you should look into in advance, especially if you are really planning out an events in advance, maybe a year, maybe 6 months. Some things you won't be able to book. You'll have to wait to that 90-day window. Hey, set an alarm, put something on your calendar, but look at that window for each distillery and each restaurant. And you might even need a longer window for Airbnbs. They can go quick depending on the time of season that you're looking to go, particularly if you're looking to stay in a very particular area. For us on this latest trip, we were looking to stay into Louisville, which is a topic that I'll come back to. But ultimately, we wanted a place that was within walking distance of Whiskey Row. And I was plotting somewhere between 6 months and 4 months in advance. And over that course of time, as we were trying to finalize our group, trying to figure out how many people we were going to have in our party, places along that lines were just disappearing. And it was real important to me, at least staying in Louisville, to be in walking distance of Whiskey Row because we don't want anyone driving. If you're able to walk, you don't even have to worry too much about Ubers. But I'll get to a story on that later on. So, my second tip is to get lunch reservations when you can if you are doing distillery tours all day. Lunch is very, very important for this type of trip, for that type of day. You do not want to go all day without any lunch. And there are some areas, particularly if you're in, say, Bardstown, where it's not that easy to just roll up and eat lunch. Some places that you can roll up to are packed, crazy packed. There was a trip 2 years ago where we tried to go to somewhere between Lexington and Frankfurt that my cousin was recommending. And we rolled up there, and it was an hour and a half wait for a sandwich. That's not how you want to spend your time on the Bourbon Trail, is waiting in a parking lot or in a restaurant just to get a sandwich. Do yourself a favor and look at lunch reservations. Now, another tip when it comes to meals, just to keep on the same topic, the other thing that we did, we were just there a couple weeks ago, and what we did was cooked or got pizza in. But either way, we ate inside our Airbnb 4 of the 5 nights. That saves a lot of money, and there's that whole camaraderie with your group when you're cooking together and you're sharing the meal together. And ultimately, you're going to buy a whole lot of whiskeys while you're on the Bourbon Trail. Why not have some time to enjoy them? Why go to a restaurant and pay for pours if you've been out hunting all day? Open those up and share them. And a great way to do that is at dinner time. And then it gets you at your place and you can settle in, play a game of cards. But that would be my recommendation. Invest in lunch and then cook your own dinners. Now, the one caveat to that is on this latest trip, we did go to Willet for dinner. That is a fun experience. With the Willet bar, it is essentially a tapas restaurant, all small plates. You can share if you want to, or if you do what our group did, we essentially just all ordered like 3 plates and then just gorged on it all. Particularly the egg salad sandwich, which is the thing that they are most known for. Yes, Willet is most known for an egg salad sandwich, and it lives up to the hype. All right, I haven't taken a sip of this yet. Let me dive into this whiskey. Mm. Man, this is such a lovely whiskey. The fact that it's a wheat whiskey too, 8 years old, barrel proof. These hauling stations have been very, very sneaky, especially because all the mash bills are different. So keep an eye on those colors and the different mash bills. But man, 8 year wheat whiskey from Indiana. Oh man, it is so good. All right, one more sip. Mm. So now let's get into tip number 3. One important choice that you will have to make is, and I guess it depends on the amount of time that you have, but typically we have about 5 nights. So I'm choosing one way or the other, depending on the trip. Are you going to choose to stay on the Lexington side or are you going to choose to stay on the Louisville side? And that decision, I think, is mainly impacted with where you want to visit because the drive between Lexington and Louisville is quite long. So you don't want to be going back and forth between those 2 points unless you have a really long trip, and that's a whole lot of driving. So I like setting up my base camp of operations at either one city or the other, and then hitting the distilleries that are more close to that particular city. So if you were to stay in Lexington, as an example, there are a lot of distilleries in Lexington, but really what you're looking to do is drive to Frankfurt, go visit Buffalo Trace. You can then drive down the road, go to Woodford Reserve, drive down the road a little further, go to Castle and Key. And if you are looking to have an adventurous day, maybe you drive all the way down to Wild Turkey. Other distilleries that are essentially in that side of the state are going to be Four Roses and Makers, if I've got it right in my head. The other side, though, if you stay in Louisville, then you got Whiskey Row. So the ones that we hit up in this last trip, we hit up Michter's a couple times. I'll get back to that one. We hit up Old Forester. We hit up Evan Williams. Ooh, that was fun. We hit up let's see, Buzzard's Roost and Peerless. So those were the 5 that we hit up that day, all along Whiskey Row. And then we had another day where we drove down to Bardstown, which was about 45 minutes from Louisville. And that's where we went to Bardstown Distillery. We went to Jim Beam. We went to, oh, we hit up something in between there. Darn it. I can't think of it right now. But in between Jim Beam, we hit up something else. We also went to Heaven Hill and that's it. It's all eluding me now. I had all the distilleries in my head before I started this. But those are the type of things that you really have to make a choice of. Is like, where is your base camp of operations and what distilleries are near it? And does that align with the distilleries that my party really wants to visit? So even before we made the choice of Louisville and Lexington, I was asking my party, what are the must see distilleries that they want to see on this trip? And when they said things like Old Forester, Michter's, Bardstown, Heaven Hill, it made the location of this particular trip very easy. We swayed towards the Louisville side. The other thing that I do recommend is you can only go to so many tours, you can only go to so many distilleries. It does become kind of samey doing it day after day. I like to give essentially 2 days to the distilleries and to the hunting, and then I like to plan it around some other event. So, this particular trip, we did plan around Bourbon on the Banks, which was happening in Frankfurt that weekend, but I also like planning it around Keeneland. So Keeneland runs horse races in April and October. Man, that is an amazing way to end the week, just as Bourbon on the Banks is. And there are other festivals that happen throughout Kentucky throughout the year that are bourbon oriented. So go during the week, go to the distilleries, go hunting. But when it comes to the weekend and that main event, plan it around one of the events, plan it around one of the conferences, plan it around one of the tastings. That's a good way to not only bring other people in, but get to know people, get to enjoy people's company. That's what it's all about. So I do recommend that you not only think about, hey, what distilleries am I going to hit? Plot it around an event such as Bourbon on the Banks. My fifth and last tip for this particular video is when you go to the distilleries and you go on their websites and you're plotting tours, just know that there are basic tours and then there are more elevated tours or elevated experiences. And you're going to want to do a blend of those depending on what distillery that maybe you've been before, maybe you've not been there. But ultimately, when it does come to that basic tour, they are very samey. So you are going to go through the base tour. You're going to learn about the fact that bourbon needs to be 51% corn and needs to be aged and needs this and needs that. And they'll go through all the rules. And then ultimately, what you may be hoping for is that at the end of the tour, they'll let you buy some special bottle. That doesn't always happen. That's just a day of the week kind of thing. It doesn't really work that way. So keep your eye on the elevated tours, and that might be a way to plan your trip as well for particular days because the more elevated tours and elevated experiences aren't always offered every day of the week. So when we were going to Old Forester this last time, we ended up doing the basic tour again, which some of us had already done, but some of us hadn't. So we wanted to do it anyway so that those people could see it and experience some of those moments. But really, what we were interested in was doing the more elevated tour that Old Forester offers, but they only offer it like Thursday through Saturday or something like that. So you do have to keep that in mind. If you do have your heart set on a particular distillery, it's your favorite, you want to do the all in experience, might not be offered every day. So that's an important thing to plot your trip around. But I will say, when it does come to those experiences, the elevated experiences have created the best memories. Now, they are more expensive. So typically, the tours can run between, I'd say on average, $25 to $35 for the more basic tour. When you get into the more elevated experiences, you're talking about $40, $50, $75, $100. Now, the difference in that is either going to be a deeper behind the scenes tour or or a better tasting experience where you get into some of their more exclusive brands. So the Old Forester one that I brought up for an example, on the tasting, if you do the basic tour, you'll run through the Whiskey Row series. But on the elevated tour, I think you taste a birthday bourbon. So that happens across all the distilleries. One of our favorite tours that we went on was at Peerless. It's not offered right now. Hopefully they bring it back. It was called the Heritage Tour. And man, they showed us all the behind the scenes. We got to drill into a barrel, taste straight from that barrel, and then you seal it back up again. We got to taste so many of their single barrels that aren't offered to anybody outside of that tour. It was such a great tasting, and we're just whiskey nerds. So we're just asking questions the whole time, and they're excited because we're whiskey nerds. And that just, elevates the whole thing there. We've also done a bunch at Bardstown, where one of them was a blind tasting experience, because of course it was. And then another one was a thieving from the barrel experience, where you get to drink out of three single barrels through the thieve, straight from the barrel. Char lands in your glass. It's marvelous. Those are the type of experiences, though, that stand out to me more so than the tours. But that's also because at this point, I've done a dozen tours of so many different distilleries. It is kind of the same story. So those elevated experiences, those elevated tours just add so much more to the experience that I think they're worth looking into. But you can't necessarily go into the trip buying only the elevated stuff, because it gets expensive. And if you do the fill your own bottle experiences, which we did in this last run at Elijah Craig and at Michter's, just keep in mind that you then have to pay for the bottle. So at Michter's, the fill your own, I believe, was $150, if I'm remembering right. And the Elijah Craig barrel proof was $80 on top of the ticket. That was $40. So ultimately, it cost $120 to get that bottle. But then you go through that whole experience of filling it yourself. So keep that in mind, that's part of the embedded price. If you're paying $150 or $120 to fill your own bottle, it's the experience to fill your own bottle as well. So be sure to get some pictures and be sure to get some videos. Bonus tip as I wrap this thing up, but you can do all the things that I just said. You can have an itinerary that tracks it down to the minute of where you need to be. Man, roll with the punches. Once you're on the tours, things can change and schedules can change and different opportunities can emerge themselves. So on this last trip, I did have everything plotted out to a T. Only for Michter's, we did the fill your own bottle, bought it at like 10:15, and then they're like, come back at 11:30 to fill it. And I'm like, oh crap, we're supposed to be at Old Forester at noon. How is this going to work? Well, we tried to make it work. We were about 10 minutes late to Old Forester, on the phone with them, letting them know that we're on our way. And then Darrell, of course, put the wrong Old Forester into his Uber. So then he ended up somewhere else and then got to the tour and showed up a half hour late. Oh, it was a whole ordeal. But ultimately, just keep in mind, you got to roll with the punches. You can only plan so much. You don't know what's going to happen in the heat of the moment when you're in the thick of things. But either way, kick back, enjoy it, have some laughs, have some good pours, take lots of pictures, and enjoy the experience. It can be such a wonderful, magical time. So those are all my tips for plotting your own bourbon trip on the Bourbon Trail. Let me know in the comments if you have any other tips for the people that might come across this video. And if you have any other suggestions for a Tuesday discussion, let us know in the comments as well. We'll get to it as soon as we can. So thank you for joining me today, whiskey friends. I'll catch you on the next Tuesday discussion. Goodbye, everybody.
Jeff, just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you say hello again. Oh, Jeffrey, you should just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you say hello again. Oh, Jeffrey, you should just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends.